Beatles woke. That term keeps changing meanings today. But listen to their song Blackbird and you'll hear a message of hope and unity that resonates powerfully for any generation.
This song awakens so much.
Let me encourage you to keep trying, to keep your faith. There is hope.
This song will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the Beatles. When Paul McCartney penned Blackbird in 1968, he never could have imagined how over half a century later, it would not only hold relevance for new generations, but resonate with a superstar. There's no doubt that the Beatles and Beyoncé are both legends in their own right. But how did this mesmerizing cover spark an emotional connection? And why did it make Paul so happy? This is the story of how a song born in the civil rights era continues its inspirational legacy to influence and unite in the modern day world. Beyoncé had good reasons for choosing to cover this song, one which led to a beautiful full circle moment. But stay tuned, as there will be more on that later. In 1957, Paul McCartney met John Lennon for the first time, and that very same year, 9 black school children would make international news for enrolling in an all-white school in Little Rock, Arkansas. Thousands of miles away from each other and on 2 separate continents, history was in the making.
Of course, he had his glasses off. He really looked suave. I remember John was good.
In July that year, a 15-year-old Paul McCartney was invited to a garden party at St. Peter's, Woolton's Parish Church in Liverpool. A 16-year-old John Lennon was playing with his new band, the Quarrymen.
I remember John singing a song called Come Go With Me. He'd heard it on the radio. He didn't really know the verses, but he knew the chorus.
Paul was there with a school friend, Pete Shotton, who introduced Paul to John, and as they bonded over sandwiches, tea, and their shared love of rock and roll, neither could ever imagine how this chance meeting was about to change the world of music forever. A few weeks later, John invited Paul to join the band, and the rest, as they say, is history. 2 young boys enjoying skiffle music in Liverpool was no coincidence. As a port city, Liverpool had and still has a huge Caribbean community, and the very first manager of the Beatles was a guy from Trinidad named Lord Woodbine. However, the real reason the city has so many people of Caribbean origins comes from an altogether darker part of its history.
I'm very conscious that Liverpool was a slave port and also that it had the first Caribbean community in England.
It was within this environment of being exposed to other cultures that created the Beatles.
So we met a lot of black guys, particularly in the music world. I'm thinking in particular of Lord Woodbine, a calypso singer and promoter who ran a couple of joints in Liverpool.
However, on the other side of the pond, the opposite was happening. Instead of people coming together, they were growing further apart. Segregation was in full force, and in Little Rock, Arkansas, tension was brewing.
I got a letter this morning, boy. Hey.
Paul and John met in July 1957. That same September, 9 young students in Little Rock, Arkansas faced unimaginable obstacles just trying to attend school. They had enrolled in Little Rock Central High School, which had previously been an all-white school. 3 years earlier, segregation in schools had been outlawed and was deemed unconstitutional. But despite this, their presence in this school sparked large protests from the bigoted white people who were waiting for them at the school gates. This didn't deter these students from remaining persistent and maintaining that they had just as much right as everyone else to have an education and learn. Unfortunately, the powers that be had other ideas.
And we would see what was going on and sympathize with the people going through those struggles.
September 4th should have been about reuniting with friends, catching up on classwork, and rushing to get in lunch line before the good options ran out. Instead, for Little Rock 9, as they showed up at the school gate, they found the Arkansas National Guard, who at the request of Arkansas Governor Orval Faubus were there to stop them from entering the school.
This is, to me, where civil rights started.
This decision generated national publicity and President Eisenhower intervened. It was not until 3 weeks later, on September 23rd, that these kids were finally able to attend school again.
We were told we would have to take a lot, and were warned not to fight back if anything happened.
But even then, it came with stipulations, further separating them from their white classmates. They had to leave early for safety reasons, and a few days later, when they finally managed to have their first full day of school, they were constantly looking over their shoulders, wondering what problems they'd be facing next.
One girl ran up to me and said, "I'm so glad you're here. Won't you go to lunch with me today?" I never saw her again.
Not only did they experience bullying, violent threats, and discrimination in the schoolyard, but the anguish didn't end when they got home. They faced abuse in public, and some even had to come to terms with vandalization of their homes. The Little Rock 9 upset the status quo, but things were soon about to change. 1958, Governor Faubus closed all public schools for an entire year until he was forced to reopen them and make them available to all kids. This is a very short summary of what happened, but it is basically what Paul would have read in the newspapers about this moment and about the Little Rock Nine.
We would see what was going on and sympathize with the people going through those troubles.
So how does Paul McCartney end up writing about this moment over 10 years later? Well, in the intervening years, the Beatles would experience firsthand just how deeply rooted this problem was. By 1964, Paul and the Beatles, who were just a group of friends who loved music, had experienced success like no band had ever seen before. They weren't just a household name, but a global phenomenon.
We never played to segregated audiences, and we aren't going to start now.
As a result, they were in huge demand to play gigs across every corner of the US. However, the issues at play regarding race and segregation were unavoidable despite the Beatles' fame and popularity. There was one concert in Jacksonville, Florida that highlighted to the Beatles the full gravity of the situation.
I'd sooner lose our appearance money.
The venue wanted to host segregated audience, so 5 days before the concert, the Beatles made a big announcement that they would play to everyone at once or they wouldn't be playing at all.
We weren't into prejudice. We were always keen on mixed race audiences.
Not wanting to lose out on hosting one of the biggest bands on the planet, the promoters caved in, and the Beatles performed in front of a united, diverse crowd.
It wasn't out of any goody-goody thing. We just thought, why should you separate black people from white? That's stupid, isn't it?
Can you think of a time like when the Beatles, you stood your ground and refused to do something you didn't agree with? Let us know in the comments. The Beatles are witnessing a sea of change across America.
Looking, do all without doing.
At the time of writing Blackbird, Paul and the Beatles had just come back from India to study transcendental meditation. It was in India where Paul heard the beautiful call of a blackbird in Rishikesh. When the Beatles were back in Britain, Paul ventured up north to the Scottish countryside. The music came first and the lyrics followed. Paul had a nice guitar riff inspired by the German composer Bach.
Part of its structure is a particular harmonic thing between the melody and the bass line, which intrigued me. Bach was always one of our favorite composers. We felt we had a lot in common with him. I developed the melody on guitar based on the Bach piece. You often did things just as party pieces, things to show off. Literally, at a party, hey girls, you would do that. Unfortunately, none of them bothered.
But there was a thing that George and I used to do, which was we thought it was Bach's piece. I developed the melody on guitar based on the Bach piece, took it somewhere else, took it to another level. Then I just fitted the words to it.
And you're probably wondering why Beyoncé chose this song for her country album, as it isn't technically a country song. However, the finger-picking style was inspired by country legend Chet Atkins.
The finger-picking style was something we admired in Chet Atkins, particularly in a piece called Trombone, though it was also played by Colin Manley from a group called the Remo 4. They'd started out in Liverpool around the same time as the Beatles.
Paul had initially thought about singing directly to a black woman in the song.
I had in mind a black woman rather than a bird, though those were the days of the civil rights movement, which all of us cared passionately about. So this was really a song from me to a black woman experiencing these problems in the States. Let me encourage you to keep trying, to keep your faith. There is hope.
Once he had a beautiful musical backdrop, the lyrics came to him. The message he wanted to send was a metaphor of a blackbird whose wings had been broken but still fought on.
I remembered this whole idea of you were only waiting for this moment to arise. It was about black people's struggle in the southern states, and I was using the symbolism of a blackbird.
On June 11th, 1968, Paul recorded Blackbird on his own in Studio 2 in Abbey Road, and the song is known for its bare bones production. All we hear is Paul, his guitar, and his hand tapping.
It's not really about a blackbird whose wings are broken. It's a bit more symbolic.
Meanwhile, in Studio 3, John was recording Revolution 9. George and Ringo, meanwhile, were both in America. Paul took 32 takes, and only 11 were completed. It was the final take that Paul used, and then added extra bits of guitar to it later on. While not a single, Blackbird would become a standout song from the Beatles' White Album and convey a much-needed message of hope to the world. Not only was it a timely song, but its universal message allowed it to be applied in a modern context, and this is why it is still on the charts today.
I can fly wherever I want to fly now, but what I want is that generation of young people behind me to know the same thing.
Though miles away, the Beatles felt the weight of these struggles and channeled them into Blackbird. Little did they know this song would become an anthem for hope, resonating for decades to come. Since its debut, many other artists have covered Blackbird. Billy Preston, Sarah McLachlan, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Alicia Keys are just a handful of these names. While Paul's version just contains his voice and a guitar, if you want an incredibly layered and energetic version of this song, then definitely check out Billy Preston's cover. Trust me, you won't regret it. One particularly interesting coincidence I've found is that the Little Rock Nine were scheduled to start school on September 4th, which just so happens to be the Queen Bee Beyoncé's birthday. Have you ever had these coincidences that further aligned you to something? If so, drop them in the comments. Beyoncé grew up in the 1980s, so she benefited from the bravery of the Little Rock Nine. And growing up, she had helped bring down barriers in her own right too, making her a perfect person to cover the song. Beyoncé's cover definitely stays true to the original, but with extra diva vocal harmonies that Beyoncé is renowned for. Personally, I think it's a great version, but nothing's ever gonna top the original. But hey, in my eyes, I don't actually think that's possible. That being said, Beyoncé did a brilliant job of putting her own spin on it. Have you listened to Beyoncé's version of Blackbird? Let me know what you think in the comments below. As for Paul's thoughts on it, well, he's never been shy to speak his mind, and he absolutely loved Beyoncé's version.
I'm so happy with Beyoncé's version of my song Blackbird. I think she does a magnificent version of it, and it reinforces the civil rights message that inspired me to write the song in the first place. I think Beyoncé has done a fab version, and I would urge anyone who has not heard it yet to check it out. You are going to love it.
Since its release, Blackbird has become a song loved by both Beatles and Beyoncé's fans. But the big question is, what do the Little Rock Nine think of it? Well, in 2016, Paul got to meet two of the Little Rock Nine while performing in the city. When playing Blackbird, he said,
We would notice this on the news back in England, so it's a really important place for us because to me, this is where civil rights started.
And in 2024, another member of the Little Rock Nine named Melba Pattillo Beals spoke to NPR about her inspirational life. By the time Blackbird was released, she was a grown woman in her late 20s. She did not know immediately that the song was about her, but immediately felt a strong connection. She has been loving this song for over 50 years, and now, at 82 years of age, she has found a brand new way to appreciate this song, full of symbolism, support, and meaning.
March forward, girl. You have to keep going no matter what.
She told NPR that when she hears the original version of Paul singing Blackbird, she interprets it as meaning, I see you. However, when Beyoncé is singing it, these lyrics take on a whole new meaning. For Beals, when Beyoncé sings Blackbird Fly, she understands it as I've done it and you can too.
Paul McCartney said by writing that song, I hear you. I may not be able to rescue you, but I hear you singing in your dark.
The Beatles' creation of Blackbird was their way of telling the world that there's no place for segregation and racism, while Beyoncé's cover tells the world that there may always be prejudice, but regardless of this, there will always be strength, resilience, and hope. But what are your thoughts on Blackbird? What do you remember about it when you first heard it? And how has it changed to the present day? Do you have your own inspiring story to share? Post it below, and whoever gets the most likes in 2 weeks will have a chance in winning our amazing giveaway of White Album poster.
Maybe on paper we would have sort of worked on it until we could find some way to put violins or trumpets in there. The only point where we were thinking of putting anything on it is where it comes back in the end. So there's a blackbird singing at the very end. Somebody said it was a thrush, but I think it's a blackbird.